Welcome back, everybody, to DissedMedia, a startup story, the podcast where we take you behind the scenes of starting a business from the ground up. And today we have with us Kevin Rice, and Kevin is founder of a company called CEOs and ABCs, which is focused on helping to improve, we would say, the livelihoods of working professionals, but has a long history in bringing up his own professional background and career to the point where it is today. Before we got started, we were just briefly kind of touching base, and we're going to definitely get into some very interesting things as it relates to balancing work life and home life. And as I've made mention in this podcast before, I kind of have the approach of work life as kind of one word, right? My work kind of blends into my everyday life, but I try to do the work that I enjoy. I try to do and work with people who I enjoy collaborating with, so that the things that we do don't weigh us down and feel like work. And we're going to get into all of that. Kevin, would like to welcome you to the show. How are you?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm doing fantastic.
Awesome. I appreciate you reaching out. I always try to take a little bit of a dive into the background of the people who have come on. And you have done a lot of really interesting work. You started a agency. It's worked with a lot of Fortune 500 companies. Before we kind of get into, I think, the really fun stuff, give us a little bit about your background and where you came from, what you've been doing for the last couple of years up until the work you're doing currently.
Yeah, sure. I co-founded a company called Hathaway. It was a digital agency. It evolved through multiple iterations over the years. And we started the company, my business partner and I, in 2007, 2008. And I say that because in 2007, we had a couple different things we were working on. And then early 2008, we decided to focus on, at the time, just building websites for small business clients. But eventually that kind of grew and evolved into much more of a strategic consultancy. And eventually we sold the company at the end of 2021. And so it's really fun to start kind of sharing that experience and looking back and sharing the lessons that we learned over those years. And it really started actually in college, because my co-founder, we met the first day of the dorms. We both went to Cal Poly together. First day during orientation, we met. We were close friends throughout all of college. And after we graduated, we decided we were going to start a company together. The first company was not actually a tech company. The first company was actually a carpet cleaning business that we started during summers, because kids would move different homes from one school year to the next, and they would have to get their carpets cleaned. And so we did this like carpet cleaning business. Actually, there was a very clear need, and we saw it and we fulfilled it. It just wasn't all that sexy, and it wasn't super exciting. And we had some pretty big misses throughout that summer. So we decided to try something a little different. And that ultimately became, we taught ourselves open source technologies like early days of Joomla, WordPress, Drupal.
Yeah.
Neither of us were web developers or designers. Neither of us went to school for that. But we decided, hey, we can learn this, we can figure it out. And we did. And we started getting clients to pay us to do that sort of work.
I love that. The work I do outside of podcasting and teaching involves a lot of databases, structuring and cleaning, large bits of data. And, it's interesting because it was really kind of out of self-desire to want to learn it, but also self-serving, because I didn't want to wait around for the IT people. And, I knew I could figure it out, right? So just kind of dove in and did that. I love it when people kind of fall into that. I've met so many people on the tech side of things who really just out of, they have a knack for it, and then just went in, figured out, and went from there.
Yeah, we quickly figured out our strengths. We were very much a yin to each other's yang. After the first few months, started shifting more into the marketing and sales side of it. Jesse, my business partner, shifted more into the production technology side of it. But actually on day one, when we started, there was actually like 5 of us. And because At the beginning, it was really about just not getting a corporate job and figuring out like how we can build something on our own. So we had 5 friends, started this company together. And just over time, everybody started falling off, and we'd buy out their equity for $1,000. And it was really Jesse and I were the last two standing from the beginning. And as we just kept going, small business websites turned into Fortune 500 clients. We were always really good at seeing the trends before they happened. So before mobile really took hold, we pivoted to be a mobile agency. And then we pivoted to be a customer experience agency. And then we saw it's no longer about just the experience, but like businesses really need outcomes. So we became like a digital growth partner. So it was always like evolving the business a couple years before the market started speaking the language.
What struck me when you were telling the story of your founding and then ultimately your exit was you did it right around two very major global events, right? So you
Sure.
started this business just after the housing bust and you sold it just around COVID.
Yeah, just after COVID. Yeah, both of which were both really important for how we were building the company at the time. Because in the early days, it was really the economy was tanking. It was the 2008 housing crisis. So we were building open source technology. And that meant we could build really complicated e commerce sites, community sites, listing sites for pretty affordable prices. Then, like I said, that kind of evolved. And then when COVID hit, we had already pivoted our business to focus exclusively on the restaurant industry. And when everything shut down, every restaurant had to close their doors. We were building online ordering and delivery applications and loyalty programs and CRM platforms for these large chain restaurants like Wingstop, Burger King, Dutch Bros, Red Robin, all of these businesses that the only lifeblood they had towards sales and revenue was through online channels.
Yeah.
So COVID actually became a launching pad for us. We doubled our company easily between 2020 and 2021.
Yeah, I've been working in consumer goods for forever. It's kind of where I started and grew up in my professional background. But one thing that has always been very interesting, because I've worked with a lot of sales and marketing data. And one of the things that we've been able to always kind of get our hands on is scan data. And for those who don't know, scan data is when you go to the checkout and you scan your products, all of that data collected from Walmart and Kroger and everyone else, they will either sell it to data aggregators like AC Nielsen, or they will house it themselves and sell it out to partners themselves. That data is very valuable, but one of the things that has always been tricky in this industry is getting restaurant data, because there's no big universal systems that tie all that stuff together. If you're serving wine gets on the menu, comes off the menu pretty quickly. But thanks to COVID, thanks to everybody moving their menus to QR codes, putting their stuff online, updating their menus online, a lot of that data has become a lot more accessible. And companies are out there being able to access more of it. Still don't have necessarily all of that deep insight sales data, but at least we have better information that's present on the menus, which is incredibly helpful for a lot of people.
Yeah. We saw in 2010 to 2015 this big transformation in the retail industry. And then it really hadn't taken hold in the restaurant industry. So in 2016, we had this belief that the restaurant industry had to evolve. There was some leaders like Domino's and Starbucks who are proving that digital transformation works.
Yeah.
And our belief was this is a wave that is going to happen one way or another, and we want to be on the forefront of that. So we actually, on the heels of a layoff, because we had a rough ending to 2015 where we finished all these big projects, revenue went off a cliff, and we had to lay off a third of our staff. But the result of that was, okay, we're going to go all in on one industry. And we stopped taking business from CPG companies. We stopped working with Pepsi, Clorox. We let a relationship that we had with Applied Materials for 5 years. We let it go because it wasn't aligned with where our direction was moving forward. And by focusing on that industry at the right time, building some IP, we were able to catch the wave and consistently grow. Ultimately, when we sold the company, we were over 250 employees.
That's amazing. So, before we got started, because the work that you're doing now, a little bit of a pivot. You've kind of taken a step back. We talked a little bit before about the energy and effort that it takes to grow something to that level, and I think anytime you're servicing clients that large, back in my day, my first 20 years of my career was spent at Coca-Cola. And I can tell you, being a sales marketing operations person, supporting everybody from McDonald's to Walmart to Disney and everyone in between, it requires a lot. It requires a lot of focus and dedication and a lot of time and hours spent at work and away from home. Tell me a little bit about that journey that you took on the ride up to getting to 250 employees.
Yeah, it was definitely learn by doing. That's Cal Poly's motto. So when we started, neither Jesse nor I had any sort of professional experience. We were just figuring it out as we went. And so there was plenty of imposter syndrome throughout the way. But the way I look back at it, it was the imposter syndrome was actually a good thing because it meant that we were pushing ourselves in a place that we were uncomfortable with. And that's the only way to grow. So we had to just figure it out. We hired consultants, we hired strategic advisors who could always give us a little bit of leadership and guidance beyond what we had experienced for ourselves. But it was an incredibly stressful business to be in. Like the model was stressful because in consulting, you are selling and you are fulfilling, and those have to be in lockstep. If you sell too much and you don't have enough resources to fulfill, you have a problem. If you don't sell enough and you got too many resources and they don't have work to do, that's a problem. So it had to be this perfect concert of sales and scaling up and sales and scaling up. And so that model was incredibly just challenging. But then on the other end, the work we were doing was mission critical for clients. So if somebody's online ordering application went down on a Friday night, they could lose $300,000 in one evening, and that would fall on us. And so the pressure to perform and not have unforced errors was great and mounted as we continued to grow and have bigger and bigger clients and relationships.
I got to ask this because I share that experience of being under the gun, being in high pressure situations, satisfying clients with huge names right behind them. And I know for me, a couple things. One, there was a period of time when I started to experience panic attacks, right? Just like your heart would start racing, getting these butterflies in your stomach because you feel like the world's crashing down around you. But another thing too is it starts to manifest in your attitude and your approach to other people. And you find that because you're going through difficult, challenging, struggling things and you're overcoming, or at least doing your best to, you start raising the bar on everyone around you. And that isn't always very welcome. So, and I know, like one of the things I've been teaching for many years, and, this had to have been over 10 years ago, but had a policy that if students had a late paper, it was a 50% deduction on the grade for the paper. And people would complain, and I'd say, look, be happy it's a grade and not your job, and you're not losing a contract or losing a client, because if you miss a deadline, and because this is the world I lived in, you miss a deadline with a big project you're working on, there is no 50% deduction. Like, you're just on the hook, and you kind of develop this approach that you're only as good as the last project you worked on. Sounds like you had a little bit of that going on in your world as well.
Yeah, I think burnout shows up differently for everybody.
Yeah.
For me, I found my own kind of way to deal with all of the stress and pressure, and I wouldn't recommend it. I wouldn't say looking back it was healthy, but I basically went into what I call robot mode. And that means just suppressing all emotions, all feelings, disconnecting from yourself so that the stress wouldn't get to you, the pressure wouldn't get to you, and you could show up and perform in a very highly like efficient and productive way. That served me really well in my business career because deadlines wouldn't stress me out. Having a tough conversation with a client wouldn't stress me out because I was just completely disconnected from those feelings that I would have normally felt. The problem is that when you are disconnected from yourself, your own emotions, you don't feel the negative side of it, but you also don't get to experience the positives. You don't get to experience the joy. And this really hit me when we sold the company, and it just didn't really feel like I thought it was going to feel. For me, this was the pinnacle of my career, what we had been working towards for 13 years. But on the day it happened, it was just a normal Monday, maybe it was a Tuesday. Um, and things changed, and now I had a new employer, and I just wasn't able to like experience the celebration that I thought I was going to have because I was deep in this robot mode and I'd been doing it for years. It also has a lot of subsequent consequences. So when you're disconnected from yourself, it's really hard to be disconnected with others. For me, what I realized was I was really disconnected from my kids. And at the time, I was a single parent, solo, raising two very young kids on my own. I had a lot of help and a lot of support from friends and family, but like at the end of the day, the burden was on me. So when I would finish work for the day, I never finished work for the day. I would come into the room and I would be cooking dinner or going through bedtime routine, and I would be mentally rehearsing a client presentation, my next leadership meeting. I could read an entire bedtime story with like voices, and I could be completely somewhere else. And at the time I thought, "Oh, this is great. I'm like multitasking. I'm super productive." But it materialized in ways where like my kids didn't really want to listen to me because they didn't feel connected to me, and we had more ruptures in the house and we had more tantrums because they didn't have a secure attachment with their primary like parental figure. And that realization led me to really rethink how I was living life, to focus more on being an integrated human, right, with my professional life and my family life, and showing up more with more intention and more presence. And that kind of led me to where I am today with my own podcast called CEOs and ABCs, some of the content I put out, and a book that I'm starting to write on the subject.
I think that that is so very, very important because I think for a lot of people coming up, and there was a time, even still today, I will say that I keep myself very busy with a lot of things. And I think because at this point I'm kind of conditioned to that. But it was way worse, I think, for me probably 12, 14 years ago because there was one point where I was a senior manager, had a big department like 40 people that I was managing. Had on the opposite end, I was also an area chair at the school that I was teaching at, so I had these faculty that I was in charge of and classes I was in charge of, and literally working like 6 7 days a week, just nonstop, go 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 for like 2 years. And I have to say, for those 2 years, did not really remember a lot of stuff we did as a family,
Mhm.
unfortunately. And those, and again, now kids are grown, they're off on their own, and we're all, you know, remain a very close family. But those periods of time, you can't get back. And so I'm curious, how what was the, I don't want to call it the breaking point. We'll just call it a point of inspiration for you where you said things have got to change, get different.
Yeah, I would say it was a period of time. It was the feeling of not really experiencing the sale of my company. It was all of the little things that were mounting in the household, like behaviors that I was seeing in my kids that just didn't seem right. And it was just a realization of I've given 100% of my energy towards my career, and there was really nothing left for my kids. And so it was more of a period of time in coming to a realization, and also working with coaches, working with therapists, doing a lot of reading, a lot of journaling, really putting in the time to understand like what had been going on with me, because it wasn't like a light bulb moment. It was like a gradual understanding over a short period of time.
So now that you're more focused on the work that you're doing now, how are you working all of that into your work, like into your podcast, into the speaking work that you're doing?
Yeah. So I do a little bit of consulting. I've done some seed investing where I do advisory work for 4 different startups that I've invested in. So it keeps me busy. I'm not somebody who's going to be out here preaching work life balance in a way that you have 8 hours a day for sleep, 8 hours a day for family, 8 hours a day for work. That's just not realistic when you are somebody who's ambitious, you're a high achiever, you want to build something that you believe in. It's going to take more work than that. I don't, so I've interviewed maybe 2 dozen C-level executives at large organizations, and that's been a common theme. Nobody's saying, I can do my job 9 to 5. But the realization or the change that can make it feel more in harmony and integrated is just coming home and being more present and being more intentional. So I'll give you an example of this past weekend. 2 weekends ago, I went into the weekend without really a plan. And we just went through the motions and we played together and we did some activities. But it wasn't really last weekend. I spent Friday night thinking through, okay, how are we going to build in connection points? We've got some stuff that we need to get done. I really want to work on work ethic and grit and resilience with one of my children. So I planned out the weekend in a way that felt like, okay, if Sunday night finishes and we do all of this, it's going to feel meaningful and it's going to feel productive. So it was just more of that shift of being intentional, putting the same amount of planning into my family life as I would have my work career.
One of the things I often talk to students about in my classes is this idea of when you're a senior leader or when you work your way up to the C-suite of any organization, that somehow, or even, you know what, I'll even throw this out there, being an entrepreneur, right? That somehow you're going to have more time, you're going to have more command over your schedule, you're going to be able to, kind of tell people what to do. The reality is that is so far from the truth. The reality is that most people I know who are at the C-suite level, even below VPs, directors, they don't really approach life looking at Friday as the they don't look forward to Friday, they don't regret Monday, they don't tell people no, I'm off the clock right now. They just kind of work and respond and kind of work everything into all of it. It's just kind of it's a process of managing the many things that are going on. For those who are in that cycle right now, when you think about those people who are working, to kind of balance stuff, you mentioned sometimes in the work that you do in your podcast about creating trade-offs, right? How do you develop that that trade-off approach and kind of reprioritizing those important things?
So there are always trade-offs. There's going to be seasons where work has more pressure. Maybe you'll have some seasons where it's a little bit lighter. You're going to have to choose, do I go to this soccer game or that baseball game? And you're going to use your best discretion. I think what I'm seeing or what I'm talking to other people about is it's the stuff in between the cracks that can actually be really meaningful. So the rituals that you do consistently, maybe it's how you walk in the door and greet your kids to reset and reconnect with them. Maybe you have like a family motto that you say together. Maybe it's we do a Friday night dinner, pizza, like pizza, movies, and popcorn night. And that's become like a consistent ritual. So I think it's like the rituals that start to build rhythm in the family. And those rituals they don't necessarily require hours on end. They just require like intention and consistency to create a sense of belonging and safety in the family.
That's so crazy because yes, 100% agree. But when you look at what they teach in business school, and they talk about developing consistency. So one of the things I spoken about quite often, is kind of this 4 core in business, right? So you have trust and communication, and you don't build trust without open communication. You don't communicate openly unless you trust, right? So there's this kind of symbiotic relationship between those two things. And you've got to show a little vulnerability. If you're going to create a pathway of trust and openness and share, you've got to be vulnerable, and that I think is really hard for a lot of people. But it's necessary if you're going to grow as a team. Certainly necessary if you're going to have a good family at home. But the other part of that, the other two of those four, is processes and routines. That
Mhm.
you have to have. A process is really about, like, anything that comes in has to have a place, right? So we have to have a pathway for things as they come in to go to, right? So we have a process for that, and the routine is that it's predictable and that it happens every time, and that, like your Friday ritual, we know on Friday this is the Friday thing. This is what we do, and those rituals create bonding and create a tighter connectedness. And these are things that we teach in business school, and it's funny that we don't carry these lessons home all the time.
So that is literally the premise of the book I'm writing. I'm like halfway through it, so don't expect a publishing date anytime soon. But it's called The Executive's Guide to Parenting. And it is how my own experience of taking business principles, frameworks, things like mission, vision, values, and applying them to my personal life and my family. Because when I became a single parent, I was a little lost, and I started going down the path of learning about parenting. And there's just so much. I was finding that everything wasn't really communicating to me. It was speaking to a stay at home mom, not somebody that was running a large organization. And so I needed to find a way that I could apply like what I did know into what skills I was trying to develop. And so I'll give you one example that kind of builds off what you were just talking about. Is we used to create flywheels as part of strategies. And a flywheel is, a few different components that work together. That is, you push one component, it pushes into the next, and eventually it creates a wheel that's self-compounding and self-fueling. And so I looked at, okay, in an organization, because families and companies or organizations, you work together to achieve some sort of mutual outcome. In a corporate organization, it might be sales, right? That's the currency. At home, I look at it as connection. That's the currency of the home. And so if I'm trying to create more connection, using this kind of flywheel analogy as an example, there's a few steps that I see that I've worked with my family and my kids on. And the acronym I use is SPARK. So S is for safety, P is for presence, A is for attunement, R is for rituals, and C is for celebration. And as you go through and you build those aspects into your family dynamic, it starts to create more connection in the same way it would for a corporate organization to create more sales or revenue.
It reminds me of, so when I did my doctoral degree in business administration, but I did a concentration specifically in industrial psychology, because I really was into positive psychology, which was something that was kind of emerging at the time when I did it. And one of the founders of the positive psychology movement, Dr. Martin Seligman, he runs the Positive Psychology Institute up at UPenn. He has a model called PERMA. That model kind of talks about how these elements are the things that we kind of need to ensure, kind of a positive outlook, positive appreciation for the things that we have going on around us. And so when we work in they kind of, he relates it to individuals, and then there are other people like Michelle McQuaid that kind of bring it into how this applies at work and positive relationships at work. And how you can kind of use those models in that. I love that Spark model because it kind of draws from those same kind of, core tenets of like what makes people, what gives people positive attitude, what gives them, connection, what gives them meaning. And you've got to celebrate all of those things along the way as well. I think if you don't recognize when things are going good, it's difficult to only kind of focus on the negative stuff. I think in corporations, a lot of times we kind of get transfixed on all the things that are wrong without necessarily celebrating all the even the little things that are going well.
Sure. It's funny 'cause now I'm feeling a little bit of imposter syndrome myself because I'm like writing this book
No, you
and
shouldn't.
there's all these experts out there who've done all this clinical research. And I'm like, oh,
No,
this sample population of one over here.
no, you shouldn't. And here's why. You are going to bring to it a perspective about that. So, a lot of times, Seligman, for example, we talk about things sometimes in a very high level theoretical point of view. And theory is great, but application and practice is where it connects and makes it real. So please do not like move forward with that because you have to give people the real life practical ties to stuff and say what you found further reinforces what other people have theorized, right? And so you're putting it into practice and making it real. So no, my by God, all means, move ahead.
I appreciate that. I'll give you one more practical example that I've been writing about recently. And when I was in my career and I would be assessing somebody's performance and trying to figure out what's going on with an employee, there's a kind of concept that's been around for a long time called the skill versus will matrix. Do they have the skill to do it? Do they have the will to do it? And depending on where they fall in the matrix helps you determine, should I support them? Should I manage them out? Should I give them a promotion? And I started using this analogy in the home with my kids, but realizing there's different axes to this kind of model when you're talking about an 8-year-old whose brain is not fully developed, whose nervous system is not fully developed. And so I started looking at it as more of a capability, but then also connection. Like, how connected are we in that period of time? Because if we're connected, I get so much more compliance for my kids. Not everything is a fight. And then on the other side of the axis, it's just nervous system regulation. Are they regulated in that moment? Have they eaten a good nutritious diet that day? Did they get enough sleep? Did something jar their routine? So I can understand when we go through challenging moments together, if we're not feeling connected or we've been distant because I've been working too much, okay, then I can understand why they might be pushing back. And if they haven't eaten food for 3 or 4 hours, I can also start to understand things. So I really spent a lot of time looking at all these corporate devices and frameworks that I used every day in my career. And I'm trying to figure out, how do they parallel and apply into family life?
I think, and again, this is why I think is really important that you, one, keep revisiting this, but two, like wrap it up and make it digestible for people, because as we're developing, I think, our careers and our livelihoods and we're making a name for ourselves, we get really obsessed about that. And not everybody. Certainly, there are people who even reminded me at times, like, hey, slow down, keep your eyes on the real priority, which is at home. And they weren't wrong, but it still doesn't negate the fact that you've got a mortgage, you've got bills, you've got obligations, you've got people who are relying on you at work, and so you've got to find that balance of those things. At work, we can go to management training, we can go to different seminars, we can go to workshops. And what's interesting about this balance is that behavioral science is focused on kind of figuring out how people think and do, right? Industrial psychology is all about how to apply behavioral science at work, but it's all based on people. And everyone else in our lives outside of work are those people. And it's interesting to me that we do focus all of this time on how do we give feedback? How do we collaborate? How do we, make sure we're, when we go into a sales meeting, how do we make sure that we are addressing all of the right things? And all of the psychology to business applies at home, but nobody seems to make that connection that all of this behavioral science stuff that we're bringing into the workplace can equally benefit us at home. We just need to reframe it so that it doesn't sound like, okay, son, at the end of the week, we're going to have our one-on-one meeting for an hour.
Right. We're not trying to turn our kids
bedroom.
in our house into a factory. Yeah. But there's also a lot of things that when you walk through the door, areas of management that you might be executing perfectly in your career, and then you walk through the door and you completely forget it. And I'll give you one example is I've never heard a good leader, or really any leader for that matter, tell an employee who questioned a decision or an approach because I said so. Right? Like you would never say that to an employee. You would help them, you would bring them along. You would help them understand your thinking. And maybe they change your mind, maybe they don't. But either way, like you're going to give them a voice. But then you walk through the front door, and I was lucky. My dad always allowed me to ask why and question his decisions, which was really taxing on him because I asked why a lot. You see, it's the hallmark of dads is like the kids say, "Why can't I do this?" And the response is, because I said so. How is that okay? Or why would you never say that in your job, but then you'd come home and tell your children, just do what I say, don't ask questions?
One of the things I used to say, I don't know if I'd have the same approach, although I think maybe the spirit is still there. But and it's true. You have to give voice to people in the organization. You have to one, build a level of comfort that people can express their opinions.
Yeah.
Very important.
Safety.
Yeah, absolutely. But one of the things I used to say is, everybody has a voice, but I have the final say, which
Sure.
is kind of that because I said so thing there. But really, because at some point in an organization, you have to lead. You have to be the one that calls the shot and stands behind the decision. And the one thing that I try and impart on people is that, well, the reason I take that approach is, when it goes wrong, I'm going to be the one who's held accountable for it. And so the decision that I make has to be the one that I feel the most confident standing behind and standing in front of a room of people and defending. And yes, everybody has a voice, but the reason I have the final say is because I'm the one who's
accountable.
bluntly,
Yeah.
my ass is on the line if it goes wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're in violent agreement, I think, in work and at home. If my kids ask me for a treat after lunch, I'm going to say no. They're going to say why. And it gives me a teachable moment where I can explain to them like about our bodies and the nutrients that they need to get through the rest of the day. Just like in your career, you want to bring people along because you don't want to quiet their voice. You want everybody's input. But at the end of the day, when you are a leader, sometimes it means making decisions. In my career, a lot of times it was towing the line and staying the course. Because in a startup, there's this trend of if something's not working, you just pivot. And there was many times in our company where the consensus was we need to pivot and go from being a software or like a services consulting firm to a software business. We need to build a SaaS software. And I had to just hold the line and make sure that we kept going in the direction we were meant to go in. And I would use that veto power to make sure that we didn't go off and pivot every 2 years because we wouldn't have ever gotten anywhere.
That's very true. And in the tech world, and I think Facebook gets a lot of we'll call it blame. It's not really blame per se, but the mantra of kind of move fast and break things. Really hard to scale a business with that attitude and that approach because you have to have a plan, right? We can't just pivot every time, the wind changes.
Like my children's motto, move fast and break things around the house.
Yeah, it's and it's hard to scale, right? With that approach. But I like this whole approach that you take of, kind of working family into the business life and working a family perspective into that. Because I think a lot of times at work, we forget that, the people who we see every day in the hallways, we forget that they have families and parents and children and other people in their lives, and that, work is important to them, but maybe there are other things that are also important to them. And we need to kind of make room to kind of recognize that stuff. And then too, to the point of what you're working on is kind of give people a field manual of how to incorporate these things so you don't end up with panic attacks and, crazy things like that can be really disruptive and stressful to you.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Let me ask you this, Kevin. When people are looking for you, for your work, for your podcast, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. The podcast is ceosandabcs.com. So you can find all the episodes on the website. You can find them on YouTube. It's available on Spotify. It's available on Apple. We're about 6 months in, and it's just become such a passion project for me that creating a forum where we can talk about the realities of being an executive in high pressure situations or careers, and the struggle and the lessons learned of still showing up and being there for your family. So how you lead at work and still show up at home and not sacrifice yourself or your family in the process.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question here, and it's going to sound like it's going to sound like Sophie's choice here, but thinking back on the episodes that you've done and the people that you've interviewed, what is one or maybe a couple that stick out in your mind as those that really kind of resonated with you?
I think they've all been interesting for different reasons. I go in
True
thinking
parent,
we're
true
going to kind
parent
of
answer there.
I love all my children. But I go in thinking we're going to have the same conversation over and over, and it ultimately takes so many twists and turns.
Yeah.
I learned from somebody who I had actually worked with. He was a client of mine. I learned that he grew up without a father. I had no idea. We had never had those personal conversations before, and how that influenced the way that he raised his kids. I've had other people talk about being a single parent. That's something that was not a dialogue that I had in my career with other single parents talking about how difficult it can be to manage everything in the schedules. So I don't think I could give you like any specific one, but I could tell you they all surprise me and go in different directions that I wasn't expecting.
That is really cool. I will say that is one of the things that I love about doing this is the kind of things that get revealed in conversations. But what you just said there about the fact that, you get so focused on the work. And by the way, folks, no, it's not appropriate to get into these conversations at work. It's great when you can build friendships and have a connection outside of work or the project and things of that nature. And for business reasons, there's a lot of reasons why sometimes those relationships can be a little challenging. However, it is so cool, I think, when you're able to break away from those workplace relationships and kind of get into some other topics and other things. The things we discover, the things we learn. Man, I'm so glad to hear that you're kind of bringing those conversations to life. That is really cool.
Appreciate it.
Well, Kevin, I thank you so much for your time. I think I love this topic. I love the idea of focusing on, like I said, building that field manual that kind of bridges life and corporate life, together, helping people learn how to manage and maintain that balance. And something else I kind of read or picked up on, and when I was reading about you, is that perfectionism is a bit of a hoax. We're not perfect people. We all struggle with things, with stuff. Mental health is very important. And this idea of balancing it all or having it all, that's great for movies, but in reality, it's really freaking tough to manage all that stuff. So I'm glad that you're bringing focus and attention to the conversation, because I think it's really important for a lot of people, to tap into.
Yeah. No, life is messy, and it's definitely important to give yourself some grace along the way.
Absolutely. Kevin, thank you again for being part of the show. For everyone else, thank you all for checking out DissedMedia Startup Story. As I like to say, share this with friends, family, coworkers, maybe even some people you don't like, because every share, every like, every comment only helps us, helps the algorithm, gets more people noticing us. And that's always nice too. And if you don't mind, feel free to, drop a line, drop a comment, say hello. Love reading what people have to say. Until then, thank you all very much for checking us out, and we'll see you next time. Have a good one. Thanks for listening to DissedMedia, A Startup Story. This podcast was produced and edited by Ben Olmos and is a production of DissedMedia Corporation. If you're interested in learning more about anything you heard on this episode, please reach out to us at podcast@DissedMedia.com. You can also get more information about this and other episodes or information about our guests by checking out dailypitch.news, our business and insights publication focused on helping managers, leaders, and entrepreneurs get better at what they do.